Okay, buddy. I can see that.
Well, that's
Yep.
us live. We were due back on air on Sunday, but due to technical faults or our incompetence, Johnny, I don't know, one or the other, we couldn't get a show out.
Is that
This
the
is
royal
it.
we, is
This
it?
is what we're going to be repeating from what we had said and talked about on Sunday. And the first thing was, Johnny, to go over to get your view on Operation Yellowhammer, and because of events happening in America, how relevant Operation Yellowhammer is if people don't even know about it yet.
Aye, absolutely. So, Operation Yellowhammer is the UK government's official plan to militarise hard Brexit. Right, hard Brexit, as they plan to do, has never been done. It's never been done because they needed the overarching cover of a war to actually see it through, to force it through. Now, in the Operation Yellowhammer document itself, it's a whitewash in essence. I've written about it a number of times. It's my pinned tweet. What it does acknowledge is that there will be civil unrest because hard Brexit is cutting everything off at the ports, all transport, foods, medicines, etc. So it will lead to breakdown of normal kind of logistical supply chains and mass civil unrest. The document acknowledges there's going to be civil unrest, and it acknowledges that the police may not be able to cope. Of course, they wouldn't. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't acknowledge that there are not enough British troops to police the entire UK population, right? They could barely initiate, and there's absolutely no way they could sustain a long-term deployment. And of course, that's us in a dictatorship. And what is also missing from the document is the very fact then it would need external military support, which was planned to come from Trump's US, and they would essentially supply the military manpower to start putting down the population. They erased the existence, so they had a barely, kind of half-hearted attempt at implementing it in 2019, but they bottled it. I think they bottled it because it would have it would have spiked the entire plan, because they've only got one chance to militarize and get it right, put us down and get it right. They've only got one chance to do that. And so since 2019, there has not been a thing in the mainstream media about it. All of our so-called left alternate media, so in the independence campaign, as well as down south with the kind of pro-Brexit, seemingly pro-Brexit, Double Down News, Novara Media, and the rest of them, they have all, by propaganda omission, erased the existence of Operation Yellowhammer. And if I could just read this brilliant wee quote out by Aldous Huxley. The greatest triumphs of propaganda have been accomplished not by doing something, but by refraining from doing. Great is the truth, but greater still, from a practical viewpoint, is silence about the truth. Orwell put it more succinctly: the most powerful form of lie is the omission. And what I'm trying to tell people is that our entire SNP, Wings Over Scotland, Craig Murray, everybody that led the conversation, still leads the conversation, certainly since 2014, and some since who've entered the fray, as well as all your English alternate centre-left media, seemingly, they are all lying to you by propaganda omission, because they've hidden the fact that Yellowhammer exists, and they need to do that to blame, and for the UK population to take the blame for the militarization that's about to unfold.
In terms of the documentation of Operation Yellowhammer, Johnny, I've gone through it, and I've also read the Internal Market Act, which is quite frightening as well, and I would urge people to look at that too. But the documentation, it's especially from the Internal Market Act, stresses that if there's an emergency, whatever that emergency means, that means that all the devolved parliaments will be shut down and
Yeah.
Westminster would take over. It would be kind of a martial law. Now, before we get to that emergency, they have to announce something very, very big to the people, and that would mean the militarisation. So if we join the dots, we can see from the Internal Market Act, we can see from Operation Yellowhammer that they're trying to militarise democracy. Now, I would put this to you, Johnny, and maybe you can back this up, but if we don't talk about it, and if we look across to America and we see ICE being started, and ICE are now under the control of the federal states, so they belong to the government. They're creating merry hell, they're creating chaos. And now we've had a reform, who, by the way, Johnny, they are primed to be at least in a coalition at the next general election. They've got now people saying, ICE for Britain. To uphold our values, we need ICE. This is a slippery slope from Operation Yellowhammer that people haven't looked at on our doorstep.
Well, Trump and Brexit were the same coup, right? Are the same coup, same failing coup. The reason it's failing is because it was basically catastrophically interrupted in Berlin on the 25th of June 2017, when I basically walked up to two Bundespolizei police, told them what was coming, and they let me speak to, that was the official diplomat building in Berlin, and let me speak to the Irish embassy as well, and I told them what was coming and how they were going to militarise it. To that end then, Farage, UKIP, having been platformed repetitively by the BBC on Question Time, and then the remainder of the entire UK mainstream media basically normalised his presence on television and into mainstream politics, as it were. Farage and now Reform are and have been all along a British globalist establishment project all along, in which he creates, Pauline Hanson's the same in Australia, Trump's the same in the US. They create the right-wing rhetoric and the anti-immigration rhetoric in order that those with the levers of legislative power can actually create the fascist legislation to fill the vacuum they themselves have collectively created. And so and you've heard Farage and Tommy Robinson and other agitators, so agitprop plants, all right, gatekeepers who have essentially, asked Trump to bring the military over here to save Britain from Labour, but it's all the same machine, left and right.
Correct, Johnny. The other thing, you mentioned something there about people from different parties around the world. There was I can't remember where it was, but I saw it in a podcast, and people were analysing, academics and professors and people like that were analysing that in all those countries, Australia, there's people there taking the Trump line. In Italy, there's very right-wing people in there. In Holland, there's been right-wing, and they're all reckoning that the powers that be above politics have been working really, really hard to get people that they can control to put them into those parliaments and affect change and affect control or chaos. And it makes sense, I guess, because when you see the Australians, there's fierce debate in there about those that are wanting to take a hard line on their citizens and be pro-Israeli all over the place. Even in Germany. And it just seems to me that there's people that they can infiltrate with their minds or their money and get them placed in these particular parliaments. And Scotland, I would argue, isn't averse to any of this.
Oh no, we're no exception. We've been utterly, infiltrated as well, and have been. I have been since there was a Scottish Parliament. There's actually been very few and far between genuine Scottish independence politicians in Holyrood since it opened. And one of those few genuine independence politicians was obviously Alex Salmond. Yeah, and it's a truly globalist plan. It's been, in the making for, for example, Operation Yellowhammer itself. The roots of that we can go as far back as the US-UK Lines of Communication Agreement in 1973, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's carte blanche for the US military to take absolute control over this entire island, right?
Correct.
But what Operation Yellowhammer is, and what the militarization is, and what the war is a corporate, political aristocracy construct.
So, if we're looking ahead to this, how do we get out of this? Because it seems like the Epstein files, which are out now, and for most sane people, for most ordinary folk, they're very grotesque and very harrowing. Details of what was happening behind the scenes with Trump and Epstein and etc. Do you think, Johnny, in your honest opinion, that people will be shocked this time, really, really shocked and angered, and then that could affect change at the governmental levels?
I'm really not sure on that, mate, because I think what's been happening with the constant drip feeding of aspects of it, I think people are actually becoming desensitized to the shock of it. But also, what we can't forget is that it is part of the agitation to do that. So they weaponize their own corruptions. All right. So we've obviously got the Epstein digital ID or the COVID stuff that they were, that both all sides, left and right, had a hand in. The war crimes in Gaza, and all the kind of trans stuff as well. So all these things which agitate, all these things that make us angry, they are weaponized and used as rage bait by the outriders, people like Andrew Bridgen and Rupert Lowe, for the establishment. So they pretend to be anti-establishment and now anti-Farage, but they're the outriders who are trying to get people into the streets violently in order to provide the pretext for the Labour government now, it would have been the Tories, but the Labour government now, to have the excuse to call on US support to manage the population, to put the population down. So whilst we're getting all these, drip-fed corruptions out in the open, they don't actually really appear to be, the catalyst for the actual militarization phase. I think that's partially because, I think the human condition is quite cowardly. I think unless things affect us directly as individuals, we tend not to get involved. And we're all too easily distracted. We've got, as long as the bread and circuses continue, then unless there's one, serious trigger, monumental trigger, i.e., a war, which is what they tried to get via Ukraine, via Iran, and Taiwan, they always had to go doing that, then I just don't see what that trigger will be that will get people out peacefully.
Well, I take your point, and you make a good point, because the human condition looks at Gaza, for example, and we're saturated with the images of dead babies, limbless babies, blood, guts, hardship, starvation, mustard gas being put on them. But there's only so much the human brain can absorb before it gets really, really upset, and it doesn't want to be upset anymore, so it turns off. And this is one of the psychological conditions they prey on, that we get, I can't bear to watch that because it reminds me too much, and it gives me a bad feeling inside. I'll watch the football instead. And this is what happens to people. But we've got to be brave, Johnny. The society we've got has to be much more brave than that and say, look, if this happened to my kids, if this happened here, what would I do? Well, when it happens, it's too late. You have to do
Well,
your fighting
yeah,
when you're talking now. And I
yeah.
think we're seeing aspects of that in America, although the revolutions are certainly not being televised. There's riots in New York, Memphis, Denver, you name it, all over the place, and hardly getting a mention on the telly.
Well, there's they're definitely trying to engineer a civil war in the US. Um, I think about a year ago. I mean, it's probably too exposed. That agenda is probably too exposed now. But not long after he retook the presidency, I could see a narrative unfolding whereby the people that hold his strings, that hold Trump's strings, were going to try and theatrically, engineer a coup as if it was against Trump, giving him the pretext to get the US military out. Although I'm not 100% convinced that he, is going to have the military on board, that they'll back him.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is intended. So civil war is what they're trying to start in the US. That is absolutely intended to make its way across here. The principal target here is Scotland. On this island is Scotland, because obviously we're so eye-wateringly rich. And this will be the role, and I think potentially coming up for the elections, that there will be agitators on all sides within Holyrood who may try to foment a civil war in Scotland.
Yeah.
Giving, at the very least, although it will be bad optics because it'll be the second time British troops have been in a Celtic country or occupied a Celtic country militarily. But anyway, to try and justify militarization here. Yeah. And it will be the people that we trusted the most in 2014, and some of those who joined the fray since, who will do most of the shit stirring to try and get that off the ground, try and get that going.
Yeah. I can imagine next year, Johnny, if we have a Scottish election and it's based on a plebiscite for a referendum or whatever, and we get to that point and nothing happens, it just carries on like before, then the people get agitated. Who do you think is in more fear of their position and what they've said? Well, I reckon it'd be John Swinney. Well, and anything to quell the masses, because we're getting very agitated. We can see what's happening down south. We're going through this austerity. Independence seems the only door open for us, the last resort for us. If he can't deliver it, he's toast.
Right.
But what will he try and instigate?
Yeah. Well, I think there may be, and I think this is what the so-called, Craig Murray's taking the Palestine action. So that law, which doesn't apparently, doesn't apply to Scotland, or shouldn't apply to Scotland. He's taking a case in Scotland to essentially prove that Scottish institutions can make our own decisions outside of UK law, which I think is potentially going to be a setup which would then allow Swinney to declare a UDI, right? Unilateral Declaration of Independence, which would be the catalyst to begin a civil war, right, in Scotland, right? Which the British state, having engineered it, would then police it exactly the same way as they did in Northern Ireland.
Yep.
Now, I understand your impatience. I understand people's frustrations. The problem that we have in Scotland is history shows us that the British have absolutely no qualms about meting out violence on the Celtic nations, right? And that would be the same, right? They would do exactly the same. So there is little point in the small population of Scotland, right, taking to the streets and being agitated into violence, right, against the most formidable military intelligence machine in the world, right? Our freedom, ironically, right, has to come from within the English working masses. It has to be them that start to bring down the British institutions from within England itself in order to drive the change, in order to make the difference.
And that makes sense, Johnny, because that's where the mass of the population are. That's where they're, if they get on board, then the government would be afraid.
Yeah.
But in Scotland, there's only a tiny minority of the population of the UK here, considering 5 million. It's not many. Incidentally, it's the exact number for a proper country to govern itself. But you're right, where the masses are, they must revolt themselves. But here's the thing, Johnny. This Jack Polanski is down there. He's taken over. But you know the ground that Jeremy Corbyn was trying to take, and they shouted Jeremy Corbyn down when he was a leader of the Labour Party for being anti-Semitic. Well, guess what? This new guy from the Green Party is. He's a Jew.
Right.
So where do you think it's all moving to? You've got the right wing and the left wing going to come together at the top somewhere and be as useless as the Labour and the Tory parties.
Well, it's the number one, you don't get a platform, you don't get to be a leader of any party without having skin in the game, right? Yeah, it's like this snake eating itself, isn't it? The Ouroboros snake eating it, and that's what's happening. The machine is eating itself, right?
Yep.
Because it's been sussed, it's been found out, and it's been panicked for some number of years now. And what's always been there is the behaviours, right? Be it the left or the right, right? The behaviours, be it politically or on street level, right? They're entitled, they're hypocritical, right? And they always act the victim. The left and the right are always trying to act the victim in one way or the other of the other side.
Yep.
Because they perceive, and most people do fall for it, but by claiming victimhood status, that they occupy the moral high ground, and therefore there's no compromise. Nobody wants to make a compromise. So Polanski is part of this same machine because it's a left and right machine. It's a truly single Orwellian machine that essentially is there to agitate the masses into unrest, to put us down and introduce totalitarian legislation.
Exactly. So what chance have we got if the English people are getting right behind this new Green Party? And where did this guy come from all of a sudden, Johnny? From nowhere.
Exactly. I don't know. Listen, so did Stephen Flynn, right?
Yes.
So did Stephen Flynn, right? Now, as as a good orator as he is, as funny as he can be, the guy is a plant, right? The guy is a plant. Absolutely no to it. He's another one that stayed silent about Operation Yellowhammer, right? There is an entire cast of them, an entire cast of actors that dominate our reality, that have captured our emotions, because in the early days they told us exactly what we wanted to hear. So they appealed to our egos and emotions, and because we struggle to get beyond that. I mean, it's just obviously again another part of the human condition. We struggle to get beyond the emotion of what we've been suckered into. Is it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled, right? Mark Twain. So because you're not only trying to break through people's emotions after they've been suckered in, you're then trying to break through their ego, because nobody likes to be fooled, nobody likes to be played, and then they've got to admit that to themselves and to each other. And the ego won't let them do that.
One of the things I've noticed about particular SNP people, I'm talking about them that are there and there now, they haven't realised this and they're still hanging on to the SNP, is that the SNP play this very well, Johnny, in my opinion. They act as if they're the underdog. And what has Scotland always been at football, at rugby, anything, we're the underdog. So they take that position and it gets the emotions. How dare you say that to our politicians? It doesn't matter what they're saying. I mean, they could be talking about the two-child gap, the pay gap, where they really pay the two kids the money, even if there was 3 or 4 in the family. And they take an altruistic position, but it doesn't matter because you're there squabbling in that circle and not getting much done outside it.
Well, that's one of the things that I noticed quite shortly after the genocide in Gaza was underway. What you heard a lot from the SNP was a lot about the domestic, domestic policy, domestic successes and domestic arguments, that sort of stuff. But what they were doing was ignoring evidence of the fact. Now, I remember being on your Caledon show, and I think that was June. So the first one I did in April. So that genocide was already underway. By which time, certainly by the June, there was evidence there that Sunak, who was Prime Minister at the time, and as opposition leader, Starmer himself had, because he'd basically said that Israel had the right to cut off water. And head of the UK Armed Forces, Admiral Radican. Now, I read out on that show some brief excerpts from the Geneva Convention, which showed all 3 of them complicit in war crimes, actively complicit in war crimes.
Yeah, I remember.
Right? And there has been absolutely nothing from the SNP on that. Now, what they could have done is hold the British state, which would go a hell of a long way to making the case for independence, is to have a symbolic vote and hold the British state responsible for its part in the Gaza genocide, right? They could even have named names because the evidence is there, right?
Yep.
Not been done, right? No one in the list. So Craig Murray, right? Wings Over Scotland, Stuart Campbell, and many others who all dominate the online space and the independence movement. And obviously the unionists, so they're obviously not going to say anything. But none of them have pressured the SNP to carry such a vote, to hold such a symbolic vote, to do that, right? So there's a record of it for history's sake, right? But what none of them have also done, right, is they haven't pointed out the fact that although this evidence exists, the International Criminal Court themselves haven't indicted, right, Starmer or Sunak or Radican, right? They haven't indicted them themselves. And so there is this century-long theatre. Well, I believe it's almost a century long of theatre in its current phase, right? That in which is, since 1933, have established essentially what Karl Rove referred to as an empire of actors, and they're in the judiciary, they're in politics, UN, they're everywhere. They dominate our entire reality, and people, because of the emotion, because of the ego, people struggle to break through it. What people don't understand, and if any unionists do ever see this, what they don't understand is that the British construct itself, right, the absorption of Scotland and the British construct itself was one of the first rungs on the ladder of the globalist agenda we see today.
Yeah.
Right? They're one and the same.
I know. It becomes apparent. And on one of those things you mentioned there, Johnny, about taking the case forward and really opening the door for independence for Scotland would be, for example, if private eye can do it, and they get all the information quite well. They knew that Theresa May's husband, Philip Hammond, was the CEO of Lockheed Martin. They were making money out of the bombing of Gaza. They were supplying Israel with the weapons. You could have said, this is not in my name, or you could have went to been on a march and a rally with people. You could have been on the papers. You could have been somewhere. Why is there some, when you're an actor in all this, Johnny, what do you think happens? Are you then under the auspices of something higher and you can't move? You're stuck.
I think if it's rage bait, right? If it's anything which can keep up the illusion of a functioning democracy, then nothing is off limits. Absolutely nothing is off limits. If somebody leaves themselves, because it's got to appear genuine, right? So absolutely nothing is off limits, right? I've seen examples whereby politicians, in fact, two examples prior to my Gaslighting Gilligan prism, but I understood how it works after I, seen it through this prism. So Gordon Brown and David Cameron, right? Each had a disabled child, right?
Yeah.
And what they did to close down legitimate criticism of the privatization of the NHS is they invoked their ill disabled children, right? To say, my child has been treated by the NHS, I would never do this to the NHS, to shut down legitimate criticism. So nothing is off limits, right? If there's a disability, if they have a disability, Pan Clancy, right? They'll exploit that to gain the sympathy that they need, right? To shut down legitimate criticism. And then what they'll do, if something is left out in the open, right, of the other side, then it's on the table, right? They can expose it. The problem is, because they know we're not going to respond, we're just, because we've had the Epstein stuff, and we didn't respond after we found out that MI5 had placed cameras in Kincora's boys' home in Northern Ireland, right? To film politicians and paramilitaries of all sides, them, wee boys, right? And then nobody reacted after that. You've had the Elm Guest House over the years. You've had the institutional inquiry, the inquiry into institutional child SA, right? And we didn't react after that, right? We didn't start bringing these institutions to book. And of course, one of the names that will surface, whether directly or indirectly, right, will be a certain George Robertson, right? So everything that's going on now, right, in that sphere, he's one of the central names to the Dunblane massacre, right? Obviously not him, it's Thomas Hamilton that we're told did that. But however, there are a number of key figures that was in Hamilton's sphere, right? Including Jimmy Savile. And of course, Jimmy Savile was pals with the then Prince Charles, right? So none of these things we have ever reacted to, no matter how shocking it is and disgusting and depraved it is. They know we're not going to respond, right? We can be enraged by it, but whatever it is about the human condition, we're powerless to actually do anything about it. And the only time we will do anything about it is if they come putting batons in our heads.
Yeah, it seems, Johnny, that we are consumed by this. I would call it a cult of personality. We attach ourselves to these people who are on our faces all the time, and we make a decision upon them, whether they're good or bad. It's almost like a goodie baddie. And then when we pick our good guys, we stick to them, and we can't see anything to be done to them because there's part of them and me. We associate ourselves with them. And it's a trick that they play all the time. You know, the emotional voice going on a party political podcast. Or if they're really angry, they'll go, the people of Scotland don't need this and blah, blah, blah. And you think, that's my man, stand by your man. But over the last couple of days, we've seen lightweight politicians, let's call them that, who think they've got more control than they actually have, come out and say, Anna Sarwar, for example, he's not backing Keir Starmer, he's asking for him to stand down. Does he actually know what he's doing? Is this a kamikaze piece of politicking? Where do you stand in this?
I think a number of things have happened, right? So that statement he made about not backing Starmer, he, I believe, would have been directed to say that, right?
Who by?
Well, you know, I guess the puppet masters, you know, whoever these Etonians are, you know, that you know, frequently inhabit the city of London and the like, these invisible men, you know, and and women, I guess, as well, who hold all the strings of power, because these politicians, they're puppets, a lot of them. They're complicit puppets nonetheless. So I think he would have probably been directed to make the statement, all right? Partially because I think Starmer actually wants out, and he's wanted out for some time, right? So they've been trying to normalise that narrative that he is on the way to stepping down, and I've seen stuff in my feed, you know, that Angela Rayner is going to possibly step into the shoes. Now, what's also happening is we're being manipulated. We're having this perception management done to us constantly. And I think part of that perception management is to anticipate, more likely than not, a significant reform presence in Holyrood, right? And Westminster eventually, right? And so the more incompetent Sarwar looks, right, which doesn't, not fucking difficult, then and you know, the British Labour in Scotland look, then more people, you know, the unionists might be more tempted to vote reform. Now, a couple of other wee developments on a similar ground, mate, right? So that failed in Holyrood last week. So the Tories tried to introduce a desecration of war memorials bill, right? In which somebody could be given 10 years, right, prison for doing that. And the bill failed, right? Ash Regan's unbuyable bill, or so-called unbuyable bill, to essentially criminalize buying sex. So basically directed at men who would buy sex, despite a lot of kind of protestations from sex workers. But anyway, both of them failed. Both of them got struck. Now, unusually, the SNP voted against the unbuyable bill, right? Now, I think what's happened is these were proposed under instruction in a time when they thought they were going to be able to get them through. But because they haven't been able to sustain the hostile environment that's been created for all of us, right? But certainly sustain the hysteria around male demonization in particular, right, for Ash Regan's, that they wouldn't be able to pass through unnoticed, right, certainly by the male population on that one. And so what I suspect is they bottled it. Had they had the hysteria, I think they would have went through, but they just don't have it. They haven't been able to sustain it.
Yeah, and that's a deliberate ploy by the government and the parliament to keep itself quite distant from the actual people, so they don't really know and they can't get motivated about things that really don't affect them that much in their own life, because most of us are trying to make a living, trying to keep the bills paid and trying to keep a roof over our head. But it's all designed that way, Johnny, and what people are watching this podcast will be thinking, well, what can we do? What can we do to revolt against all this?
Yeah, it's. I think what's going to happen is I think there's very little, we can do, and I think what has to happen is they need to make their move, right? They need this militarization phase that they've been working towards and trying to get underway for since 2017, since it first failed in 2017. They need to make their move once and for all. And until they do, I just can't see. I can't see the English population in particular reacting, because it's not just picking on them. We're all as bad.
Oh, yeah.
We exist in this, this goggle box democracy, this theatre, and we just can't seem to snap out of it.
Do you think Alex Salmond had the right idea when he was, free tuition fees, and he was bragging about this down in English studios and making the English more aware of what can happen with a proper government that looks after its people?
Oh, absolutely.
The baby boxes, all those kind of things that Salmond brought forward in his tenure as First Minister. That seemed to get working. Apart from, there were spurious things about the BBC saying these baby boxes can catch fire and stuff. And they were always trying to downplay them at every worst case scenario. But Salmond, I think, was trying his best to get most of the rest of the United Kingdom to look, this is what you can do if you pick or get a parliament that works for you. Obviously, the British government doesn't. And at that point, there was too little too late, because obviously he was getting on. He had the court cases put against him, and then he actually died when he was abroad. Funnily that. And, Sturgeon and Swinney have been sinking the boat ever since. It seems to me that people have got to get themselves together at local level and start understanding what they need at local level. Two instances, Johnny, I'll give you. Rigmore Hospital along the road, I had to go in there to visit somebody, and the place was mobbed, and they're trying to get people out as fast as they can. Why? Because there's so many people in Inverness now. They're building houses like there's nobody's business. There are acres and acres of new houses getting built. Not just that, Nairn, Elgin, Dorney, Drumnadrochit, where we are, all over the place. And half the time, nobody's buying them. Nobody's in the houses. They're empty. They've been empty for months, half a year. Yeah. So get yourself into a community centre. Start talking to your everybody. Make sure that you're not alone, because that's what they're trying to do to us, Johnny. They're trying to separate us so we don't talk to each other.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why they'll put on masses and masses of football matches and rugby matches and sports, golf. And then it's time for this, tennis, time for this, golf, and then it's time for basketball. And the season started again. Always taking us away from the realpolitik.
Yeah.
So get yourself into your community centres, discuss what you would like in your community and things you don't like, and list it in front of your MP or MSP. And if they don't listen, they will feel the wrath of the communities in months to come.
Yeah, one of the, people can start working at community level. They don't need permission.
No.
From that kind. Just start working at local level, regardless. Just a wee theory on the houses. So, you make a good point about these brand new houses being built that nobody can afford. What potentially could end up happening there is you might get corporations. It might already be the plan. Corporations to buy those houses, a reasonable market rate, but then some other shell company that belongs to the same company buys them at a more expensive price, right? A more expensive property price, and thereby artificially inflate the housing market, right? Starting to create a bubble essentially, because nobody's going to be able to afford to go into these things. Or there's another one, another one that if you have some sort of environmental disaster, let's say, down south, let's say, right? Takes a wee bit of imagination, but it's not beyond the realms, right?
Well, Grenfell.
Okay, right? And then all of a sudden, because the government want to be really helpful and make sure it looks after its citizens, well, we're really sorry about this. We don't have there's nowhere safe for you to live down here. We'll move you into these empty houses.
Yeah.
And start changing, because it's been going on for years. The face of the Highlands, in terms of the local population, has been changed since the referendum, but certainly in increasing concentration since COVID. The face of what's there's no way of getting around it. The number of English accents up here is disturbing. I think we're deliberate. It's part of the Gleichschaltung process.
I went to the opening of the village hall down here. It's just been refurbished. Two things shocked me. Two things. When I went into the official opening, standing room only, and I honestly didn't recognise anyone there apart from one or two. That was it. The rest, who are you? Where did they all come from? It almost like they were shipped in to this opening of the village hall. But then I managed to hear some words. It was just laborious stuff about how much concrete was used and how much bricks and where the money came from. But then something came to me, and it stood me on my heels. And it said, "We'd really like to thank Kate Forbes for all her help in helping us raise the money." And I just thought, you idiots. Do you realise it's a quid pro quo thing here? She's trying to get money off these people, and that could be a sweetener for something else that you don't even know about yet.
Yeah, the British American project.
And a day later, Johnny, I kid you not, a day later, there was somebody in Drumnadrochit News. It's on his Facebook page, and he says, "I saw them with the odd lights and testing the ground. Isn't that what surveyors do when they're looking to build?" And somebody says, "Yes." All of a sudden, there's another area of land in Drumnadrochit ripe for building houses.
This was basically signalled in the Internal Market Act. Obviously, following on from that has been the free ports and the SEZs, the national parks that they tried to implement, and essentially to give corporate control over national, these swathes of land from basically coast to coast, right? And I'm commenting on. I mean, I've got family, that live in England and have English accents. So it's not an anti-English statement to say it is an observation, but it's part of what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, which means same circuit, right? And this is what it is: the process of erasure by which the Nazi regime established a system of totalitarian control and coordination over all aspects of society, from the economy and trade associations to the media, culture and education. And it's pending a militarization trigger, right, which was supposed to be via Faz Lane and the Clyde, right? And that same circuit, so as soon as the single switch is pressed, right, all this Union Jackery you see in the supermarkets, the British references on television, this, that, and the next thing, the signalling in the Internal Market Act to basically close Holyrood and the Synod, and as well as the entirely manufactured UK Supreme Court, right?
Yes.
The role of them, the Gleichschaltung role of them, the same circuit role of them, is to extinguish Scotland as a distinct sovereign identity on this island. And we've had all sorts. And remember, in fact, that might have been George Robertson again. I can't remember. But he said that Scotland was he not the one that said Scotland was a minor entity in North Britain? I think it might have been him at some stage. But anyway, so that's Gleichschaltung. It's historically precedented. It's happening in Scotland today, right now. All they need is the trigger, well, a war trigger. That's why they tried so hard to get NATO into Ukraine and the US into Scotland and England. And regarding an environmental disaster down south, possibly might be as a result of the deliberate sewage releases into their waterways, right? Which would additionally manufacture consent down there. If they make such a mess of their waterways and their drinking water, then that could in itself be a ruse to manufacture consent to start pumping for corporates to start pumping fresh water from Scotland's lochs down south.
They're doing it already, Johnny. They're doing it from Wales.
Right, yeah.
But one of the things you struck upon there, and it reminds me of something that happened a couple of days ago to me, was I was just talking to some people out in the street, which we always do. We always get, and we got chatting about Drumnadrochit Rocket and what's happening. And we were talking about this guy had built his house and he couldn't get permission to build higher because it wouldn't look good in the area, So he was refused permission to build up. He's got a family and all the rest of it. They built these houses in front of us, in front of him. Now, he had a big view right across the field where it used to be a field, and that's why he built his house there.
Yeah.
He had a view. And they had carte blanche to build high and wide as they wanted. So he was asking me, he says, Nora, you should know this. How come they get permission and I don't? I says, it's when the laws are there to be bent or twisted, there will be for the big money, the corporations. When they want money and want something done, they've got deeper pockets than you. So they can get Kate Forbes in to, get a village hall built. Do you know what I mean? And then the next branch of houses get built. But as chance had it, the local councillor was walking past us, and there's the guy. He's been fighting tooth and nail for all this. And we said, well, you didn't fight on too good a fight. We've still got them. Oh, yes, but you've got to go by the laws and the rules say da-da-da. And I says, that's the very problem, isn't it? You play by their rules. And we've got to pick up the pieces because you know what? See, when the corporates have left here and left their houses and they're now in the markets and the people have got to take care of the houses, who's left with this? Who's looking onto this?
Yeah.
It's us, the community.
Yeah.
And do you know what? He says, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. I says, it's not a rabbit hole, you tube. It's not. Open your ears.
Aye. People don't want to acknowledge, difficult things. People would rather stay in a safe world. This is why, we are all Gilligan, right? Because Gilligan and Gilligan's Island, his world was perfect. I took that inspiration from Biffy Clyro's Many of Horror when they make reference to Gilligan, because they're looking through Gilligan's eyes. They don't want to acknowledge these things which are taking place. I mean, and I will claim it, hand in heart, nobody had a clue, right, in 2017 when I put the book out, the scale of media and political gaslighting, right? Gaslighting Gilligan, right, and what I did in Berlin has done that. Has exposed that, right? And that's why it's got to, so far as they're concerned, so far as these powers are concerned, it can be anybody, any kind of activist, but gaslighting Gilligan, right? They cannot have me and my work, because then people would start to acknowledge the purpose of the demonization purpose of men, deliberate demonization of men, to basically shame us into female and societal subservience, or state subservience, and into a military uniform. Upon a militarization trigger. And that's why the right are always acting as the family champions and the men's champions, because the men are supposed to get protection from the right over there and become right-wing thinkers as such.
Yes. And we
don't. All part of the channel.
Do you know this, Johnny? Even from this part of the world, up in the Highlands, we know from museums and things how men were suffocated without work, without any kind of pride in themselves because of immigration and the landlords coming over in a feudal system, the sergeants, the recruiting sergeants, would invite them to go to war. And you know what they said to them? You can wear your kilt again, because it was banned.
Yeah.
And these are the things that, well, what other choice have I got?
Well, that's it.
And you do it.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, you're in the killing fields and you're dead.
Yeah, it's starve or fight.
Aye.
You know, it's be emasculated, you know, via the TV, via politics, and you know, via shame and demonization, or discover your masculinity in a military uniform, right? Austerity has been to, you know, to take away, to remove opportunities for young men in particular to earn and to make anything of themselves, right? And the idea was, upon the trigger, you'd have this Führer type figure, which was Trump, and his wee lackey was going to be Johnson. And Johnson was actually going to perform the role of an Orwellian type character, Churchillian type character over here, right? And you know, and that's why Churchill, that's why there's so many myths about him, right? Churchill was an act. Churchill was an actor as well.
Yeah.
Right? They're just actors, given the lines,
right.
and who can perform.
That's right.
You know?
And you know, they get picked for their skills in debating and speech. If they can put the words out clearly, well, we'll feed you the words. You put them out clearly. That's all. If you think about it, Johnny, why would the richest man in the world, just about, Rishi Sunak, want to stand in a parliament where he's going to be under a lot of pressure and scrutiny? Because he can affect change to make more millions for himself and his acolytes. He was at university in America under the tutelage of the top libertarians there. You know what I mean? Yeah. Why do you think George Robertson parades with a feather headdress and gets a position of head of NATO? The guy's a chump. He is.
And that's maybe why he's there, because he's a chump, you know, because he's been selected, right? He's been, right, you know, you're our man doing this, and you're never going to step out of line, you know?
Yes.
And that's it. And of course, if they appeal to ego and insecurity, which is what the British construct does, right?
Johnny, it's a world construct, because if you can get somebody like Epstein to be part of a big system and work really hard and really diligently, you can get anyone. You can get anyone in this world to get them in.
A combination of bribery and blackmail is the perfect weapon. You know, that's the perfect combination. And if the blackmail, if the compromise is so heinous, you own them for the rest of their lives. And we're getting closer to discovering just who in the entertainment industry has, you know, sold their souls for fame, you know, to get their break. And because a lot of the, you know, some of the household names from the entertainment industry are part of the gig, you know, on either side of the Atlantic. In fact, one of the, you know, the most kind of prominent shit stirrers out there, and bearing in mind the trans agenda stuff is an agitation construct intended to agitate the population. On the other side, those rallying against it, those fighting against it, they're part of the same Orwellian construct, right? And Graham Lynham, right, Glinner, right, who's just been in a US Congress, I think it was, giving an address about how, I think it's about how basically the British government over here is outlawing speech and this, that, and the next. So similar to what, Tommy Robinson did in terms of his, plea to get Trump to intervene militarily. It's the same machine.
Correct.
Exact same machine.
But Johnny, through Gaslight and Gilligan, and hopefully people will tag along and look up Operation Yellowhammer, we can really get an idea of what's going to happen and what's been happening in Scotland and the rest of the world. It's coming from the same playbook of generations before us. as Orwell says, wake up, but the next generation wake up to this dystopia, and the next generation will. We have to really be on our guard. Read as much as you can, folks. We've come to the end of our time, Johnny, I'm afraid. If you've stayed with us for all this length of time, thank you very much. If you can subscribe, that'd be great. If you can hit the wee like button and the bell, that'll subscribe you. You'll hear everything that comes out from me and Johnny. Sadly, we won't be doing a broadcast this Sunday, Johnny. The rugby's on.
Aye, I'm away to Murrayfield to take part in the bread and circuses. And yeah, I mean, I'm just human like everybody else. I'm going to Murrayfield.
Right, well, I'll be doing the fight. I'll be fighting against tyranny and the systems that haunt us continually. But hopefully, after this week, we'll be back the week after. Fingers crossed. We're still here, Johnny. That's us. We'll catch up soon, Johnny. All the very best.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.